Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I am Yuval Zacharia, Director of Cyber Research at Hunters, and I'm excited to moderate this panel where we're going to dig into the minds of threat actors, how they think, and how we can stay one step ahead. And a special thank you to all of our awesome panelists. Let me introduce them. First, we have Shaked, who is the Director of Incident Response at Wiz. She tackled large-scale investigations all over the globe, and is a pro at navigating cloud environments. Fun fact, Shaked and I actually go way back. We served together in the A200 unit of the IDF. Moving on, we've got Amitai from Checkpoint, who leads their threat intelligence team. Amitai is a real expert in connecting the dots and identify hidden patterns, turning those findings into strategies that actually make a difference. And finally, Alon from Hunter's team Axon. He is our go-to security researcher and a talented threat hunter. Alon has a proven record of uncovering hidden threats and even campaigns that others might miss. All right, so let's jump right in. Our first question will be around methodologies. When investigating an attack, what's a key method or step in your process that drives your approach or shapes how you do things? Shaked, let's start with you.
I think choosing just one is really difficult. I'll go with three if that's okay. But I would say for me, it's always follow the evidence, connect the context, and know your limits. Follow the evidence, meaning follow the indication that you have. If we are facing a ransomware, go to one of the encrypted machines. If we are facing data that was published somewhere, let's identify where the data might be stored and focus on that. And if we are investigating an alert, we can try and focus on the entities of the alert. But I'm often seeing analysts or companies that are trying to investigate and immediately going to do wide threat hunting, just search for any indication of compromise. And while it might work, I don't think it's the most cost-effective or best way for the investigation. So I would say always start with follow the evidence. When I'm talking about connect the context, we can answer so many questions with just the context. If I'm seeing a compromised identity, I can go and ask myself, where are all the places that someone can find this credential or these secrets? If I'm seeing, for example, a machine that I'm identifying as patient 0, and I know that it's coming from a web process, I can ask myself, what vulnerability do I know it already have, and really focus my analysis on those. And lastly, know your limits. Understand that if you're trying to investigate something by finding a specific event or not finding a specific event, we really need to know if I'm even going to find it. Am I saving this log? Is it going back enough? Is there a way to do the same thing that I'm trying to find in a different method that won't generate this evidence? So those are really the three methods that I'm always trying to keep in mind when doing an investigation.
Thanks, Shaked. That sounds very interesting and actually very important stuff to do when investigating an attack. Amitai, how do you do that?
So I look at things from a little bit of a different perspective, being on the threat intelligence side. And a lot of what I'm trying to do is usually contextualize the attack in the context of the actor, who did it, and what are his motives. As a lot of the stuff that we're looking into here related to advanced threat actors and what we call APTs, that of course changes how we want to react to the attack, or what are the proper measures to respond to such an actor. And other than contextualizing it in the context of the motives behind the attack, one of the most important things for us is also to help the responding team by giving them technical artifacts of what other tools are associated with this actor, or what types of activities do they usually conduct. So it's contextualizing the attack both on the intelligence and attribution side, and on the technical side, helping whoever is responding or dealing with this attack to know what to look for. and we have a wide set of tools to do that, depending on the specific cases. But we usually rely on our previous knowledge, other publications. I think looking up previous information about similar attacks is very important when you're dealing with something, that making sure you're not doing double work. And also looking into other cases that we might find related to this one.
Cool. Do you have any examples of investigation that you did this kind of stuff and find related attacks?
Yeah, so actually, about a year ago, we did a collaboration with Sygnia of an advanced Armenian attacker that has been operating in Israel that we call Scarred Manticore. And that was quite a cool example of collaboration between the threat intelligence teams and the incident response teams, which in some of the cases we alerted specific organizations that they were breached based on our knowledge of the attacker and previous attacks that we analyzed. And then when they called in incident response teams, for example, Sygnia, we told them what kind of stuff to look, what might be more interesting for this specific attacker. And of course, in return, they enriched our understanding of the actor, that we could create a better understanding of the actor for other incidents or for our publication or whatever we decide to do with this actor. In the specific case of Scarred Manticore, the information that we received coming from the incident response helped us create a much more thorough analysis of the actor that we later published, and it was very informative and helpful in countering the threat as a whole and not just on a specific case.
That's a great example for collaboration between different kind of experts in different kind of security teams. So that's fantastic. Alon, can you give us the perspective of threat hunting or incident investigation that a Axon team kind of do in this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I totally agree with everything that was said by now. I mean, it was great examples that you gave by now, but I would like to add some specific ones that I personally prioritize and methods that I usually always follow when I conduct this kind of investigation. For example, the creation of timeline. I know that a lot of investigators tend to put everything on a timeline in different phases of the investigation. Some of them do it from the, middle of the investigation. Some of them do it in a very early stage of the investigation. I personally believe that as soon as the investigation starts, you need to create some kind of a structure of a timeline and try to put everything that you find into this timeline, even if it will include a lot of, let's say, technical garbage eventually. Because in the end, what I like to do is to create some kind of clean timeline, which includes all of the actual important stuff that we managed to further investigate and make sure that are actually related to the attack itself. In addition to the timeline, which I believe it's super, super critical things to have in any type of investigation, I also want to emphasize the importance of changing hats as part of investigations. I know it sounds like a cliche, but honestly, I do believe that when you investigate any kind of investigation, honestly, you need to switch multiple hats when doing so. You need to have the hat of the investigator, which is, of course, the default hat that you wear when you do any kind of investigation. But you need to also try to think as an attacker and try to think in different aspects and different part of the investigation about what the attacker could have done and what would I do if I was the attacker in the specific phase that I know and that I identify by now. So, for example, if I find a specific machine or a specific subnet in the network that I know that was compromised, I will always ask myself, if I was the attacker and if I was there at the moment, what would I do and what will be the next steps that I will conduct? It is super, super important for pivoting and anything that is related to investigations, honestly. Another thing that I want to mention is basically the point of view of Team Axon, as you asked, basically. Team Axon perspective is a bit different in terms of investigations. I know that we are not the classic IR firm or consultancy service provider. So we provide these services to the customer of Hunters. So basically what happens is a customer of Hunters reach out to Axon and we provide the investigation together with them, provide assistance in investigations. It's a bit different than the classic incident response, but it provides advantage together with the differences. So basically, one of the key advantages that we have is the immediate access to the logs of the customers. Because all the logs or most of the logs are ingested into Hunters, we automatically have the access to the logs to investigate them. And the time is, of course, a key factor in any type of investigations. One example that I can provide, which is related to basically the usage of the logs and the way that we use them very quickly to investigate a recent case, is a case in which a customer reached out to Axon team, mentioned that they had a specific host in the infrastructure that is compromised and wanted our assistance to understand better what really happened there. The initial indication of something malicious was the creation of a scheduled task, which is very common, of course, a suspicious scheduled task. We took it from there, investigated using different log sources that we have in Hunters, both Microsoft 365 audit logs, EDR logs, of course. When we managed to find additional artifacts and indications for the activities that had been conducted by this specific threat actor, including the initial access, which was conducted using Microsoft Teams. We basically abused the one-on-one chats to get access to basically conduct social engineering, get initial access to the organization using Quick Assist. Also executed some Java-based malware on the organizational devices, and all of it together helped us to both investigate this case, but also use those artifacts and the characteristics that we found to provide additional services to other customers that we have, and I will explain about it a bit more later. But to emphasize the importance of this access to the logs or the quick access to the logs is super important for me in my point of view. In addition to the, of course, familiarity that we have to the in the wild threats, as Amitai mentioned before, we always try to keep track on what actually happens in the wild, be familiar with the techniques, and also look for additional blog posts and publications that are related to the things that we investigate, and also think like the attackers. I know, again, it sounds like a cliche, but it's super, super important, and it plays a significant role that is super important in the money time.
Thanks, Alon. It's very interesting. Actually, you mentioned the the switching the hats kind of thing, and some of you are coming from offensive backgrounds. So for those of you that are, how has this past experience shaped your approach to this kind of investigations?
So I think that Alon actually described it really well. Always thinking about what a threat actor would do in a situation. But for me, it's not always about what someone might do, but also why they would do it. Maybe especially around monitoring and trying to identify false positive from true positive. It really helped me to stop and think, why would someone do it? If I was an attacker, will I gain something from doing it? Or is it more IT behavior? Of course, it doesn't always solve the case. It doesn't always point you to the right direction. But I think it's really helped to focus on what you should deep dive into and maybe even prioritize. I can give an example that I'm actually working on right now from a case where we have a burst of machine that suddenly started to communicate from an unregular provider, which might be considered malicious. And something that I truly ask myself every hour of this investigation is, why would a threat actor do that? What can they benefit from it? Versus why would it be a legitimate behavior? And that's really pointing us into the right direction and where we should look at first.
Thanks, Yoked. Talking about the recent investigation that you did, I know that you are now working for Wiz, and it's all about the cloud. And cloud is a very interesting case in this kind of investigations. We're all well aware of endpoint investigations. We do that all the time. Cloud is kind of more trendy now, not only for attackers, but also for us as defenders, right? So let's talk about a little bit about cloud investigations, which often brings unique set of challenges. So what's the biggest differences you see between IR in the cloud versus on-prem environments?
So I will start by actually saying that I'm a true believer that IR is IR, regardless of where you're doing it, whether it's on-prem, hybrid environment, or cloud environment. But I do agree that it's definitely bring different challenges into the table. I think two main things is, A, we have to know a lot more about the services themselves. Everything that you knew for on-prem is still relevant. You still need to know it. It still exists on the cloud, but you have to take into consideration all the different services that the cloud can offer and all the different methods that someone can gain the same stuff that they did before, but now using the different services. And secondly, that the goals of a threat actor and what they are trying to achieve might also be different in the cloud versus on-prem. If the main things that I used to see in on-prem environment was ransomware, encrypting the machine, then in cloud the focus is a bit different. Versus, it can be everything from what the threat actor is trying to go to first and achieve through the main goals. It can be setting up more resources in the environment. If we're talking about more of a simple threat actor, if we're talking about a simple threat actor, someone that's just trying to gain more resource and execute stuff on the environment, taking advantage of your compute engines, or if we're talking about a more sophisticated environments that does trying to take over the environment, but maybe taking data out of your buckets, of your databases, or even setting up persistence in an untraditional method. So if I'm investigating a compromised machine, it can be either on-prem or hosted in the cloud in AWS, for example, and I still need to do everything that I would have done for the on-prem investigation, but I need to consider the additional context. Maybe someone was using SSM, for example, to execute code on it. It won't be logged on the same way that I used to do it, and there are additional steps that I need to do. And maybe someone is trying to get to the machine to take the role of the machine and try to impersonate as it and gain access to additional resource, which is something that I didn't used to see in the on-prem, and I now need to take into consideration as well.
Thanks, Jaked. Alon, I know that you also have some experience with investigating kind of hybrid environments, mostly Azure, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first, I would like to say that I totally agree that cloud incident response has a lot of similarities to the normal traditional incident response, right? But it has some different rules. To this, it's a bit of a different game with similar characteristics, right? So that actors might have similar goals sometimes. There are phases in the investigation that are similar in the incident response, like the containment eradication. Sometimes it aligns well with the traditional incident response. But as you said, hybrid environment is a great example to still show everyone that deals with incident response that there is a connection between cloud and on-prem environments, right? Like when I conduct an incident response, it's not like I say, if it's in the cloud, it's only in the cloud, or if it's in the on-prem investigation, it's only an on-prem investigation. We always need to look at it as some kind of big infrastructure. There are connections between the on-prem and the cloud a lot of times, and it's something that we always need to keep in mind. As you said, the hybrid environment in Azure, for example, is super interesting. If I need to think about a case, for example, in which an attacker gained access to an on-prem infrastructure, and we know that there are multiple devices, multiple hosts that were compromised, like 10 or 15 hosts. If I, as an incident responder, will only look at the on-prem infrastructure, thinking that, okay, if I know which users were compromised and which servers were compromised and what I need to do in order to make things better and get everything to the normal state by rotating passwords or like conduct some containment and eradication measures on the on-prem infrastructure without even thinking about the potential implications that might happen in relation to the cloud environment, it can be super problematic. And I heard and saw cases like this in the past when incident response was conducted on an infrastructure that includes some hybrid elements in it, and the actor basically laterally moved to the cloud and the investigator didn't even know about it. So if we talk about Azure AD or Entra ID, as we call it today, you have the Azure AD Connect server, for example, in the on-prem infrastructure. If we go back to the example of 15 machines that were compromised in infrastructure, if one of them is the AD Connect server, and we didn't even think about the fact that the attacker could basically steal the credentials of the sync user from this server and laterally move to Azure by resetting password of other users, which is just one example of tons of examples that I can give about the potential way of attackers to conduct things on the different infrastructure, from cloud to on-prem, from on-prem to cloud. It can be super problematic. And this is the reason that I always say that incident response is a huge challenge. I mean, people sometimes don't really understand how difficult it to be incident responder. Doesn't matter if you do it in the cloud, on-prem, or both. You always need to think about all the implications, all the potential things that can happen if the attacker did X, Y, Z, different activities. You need to always think about the potential outcomes and think outside of the box in different ways. And it's an ongoing challenge. It's always challenging, always requires us to learn about new techniques to stay on top of the game in relation to attack that are related to the cloud, on-prem. We need to learn a lot. We need to be familiar with all of these attack types, and never forget it. An infrastructure is an infrastructure. Doesn't matter if it's cloud, on-prem, hybrid, whatever.
I can also add, by the way, something about cloud in the context of intelligence. There's a lot of time it makes attribution very tricky, because a lot of the interactions that threat actors have with the cloud are very generic in nature. Let's say for services like Office 365 or any identity-based services, attributing the attack back to a specific actor might be very, very challenging, because what you get is mostly like just IPs or stuff like that. And unless they use the same infrastructure, then attributing it could be extremely difficult.
Thanks, Amitai. Yeah, so we've covered a lot of incident response so far, which is, of course, super important and very challenging aspect, as you all described. I want to discuss a bit the proactive approach, about being one step ahead, like Alon mentioned. Amitai, what's your approach to proactive threat hunting? How do you combine intel insights to stay ahead?
So generally speaking, I think that I've done, or we do, two different types of hunting. The first one is the classical hunting in an environment which you want to find an attacker, or you assume there is an attacker, and then you run different kind of queries or signatures to find whether it is compromised. And the second type would be more wide and more generic type of hunt that we do mostly in the fields of threat intelligence, trying to find a unique attacker among a wide set of environments or a wide set of publicly available information, such as a virus total and so on. So I think there are a lot of things in common for both of those hunting types, and some of them are different. What we do in the context of intelligence is mostly the second type, trying to find the more unique attackers in a wider set of environments or data sets. In that context, I would say that our approach is usually also split into two different types when hunting for stuff. The first would be more attribution oriented. Let's say we're trying to hunt for a specific actor. If we were talking about scared manticore, then we would try to characterize how scared manticore operates and then run a wide query for those kind of things, whether it's file names that we associate with them, specific techniques, specific scans that we can initiate to find their tools. And the second type would be more of a behavioral hunt, taking some sort of a technical aspect of activities in general, let's say DLL sideloading, and think of innovative ways to find those kind of techniques as used in the wild. And this could be applied to a lot of different kinds of techniques. So if you take DLL sideloadings, you can search for known DLLs that are sideloaded, known weak binaries, but you could also go and take it to the area of the cloud, like searching for malicious files, abusing cloud services such as OneDrive, which is something that we see very often. I would say that one of the things that I put an emphasis on, and is very important, is also to rely on existing detections and existing information, especially in environments that you're looking into. I could say that some of the most interesting actors that we found were like in environments that had the alerts, had everything. They had the initial lead to find the bigger juice, but they were just overlooked. So when you do hunting, make sure to look at what's already being alerted, what's already being triggered, and don't ignore those stuff. But also make sure to follow up on what's happening there, because the really interesting stuff are usually the stuff that is more to come. Like even the most advanced sectors sometimes get detected, but their more advanced toolings usually get undetected in those kind of environments.
That was super interesting. Alon, how do you do that at Axon Team?
It's kind of similar to what Amitai just described. Basically, we have also two types of threat hunting in Team Axon. One of them is the classic one, which is a bit different than the classic one that Amitai described. We have a methodology that we try to always follow. Basically, it includes different type of elements that we take into consideration when we decide which threat hunting we should prioritize and which one we should conduct nowadays for all of our customers. We take different type of factors into consideration, like ongoing threats, trends that are going on in the wild, log sources that we know that a lot of our customers uses and products that they have, and a lot of different factors. This way, we try to make sure that we focus on what actually matters and what can provide additional value to our customers, and also increase the chance of finding actual attacks that went under the radar and were undetected using the detection methodologies, detection in place, basically. The other one, which is not the classic, it's what we call like a threat-based threat hunting, is also related to incident response in some way and to other services that we provide in Team Axon. What we basically do here is when we have some kind of investigation or in-depth research that we conduct on a specific campaign that is running nowadays in the wild, we always try to get some threat hunting thesis out of it, trying to make sure that we also cover everything related to it and try to identify additional victims throughout our customers' infrastructures. It correlates really well to the incident response example that I talked about before, so I can continue with this example and explain how we used it as part of threat hunting. So for example, in the investigation that I discussed about, we, as I said, had a specific machine that was compromised. We identified that the initial access was through Microsoft Teams using a one-on-one chat, basically taking advantage of the fact that it's allowed by default. The external communication is allowed. And what happens, the one-on-one external communication is allowed, which basically means that the attacker can send messages, one-on-one messages to the victims, and basically conduct some kind of social engineering or spear phishing, trying to make any kind of effect. In this case, the effect was getting initial access to an organizational device using Quick Assist. It basically asks for the Quick Assist code to get access to this specific device. By investigating it and conduct the in-depth research, we also found additional characteristics that are related to this specific incident. So the incident as incident was contained really quickly. There wasn't any kind of measure outcome out of it, but we did try to get the most out of it to make sure that we understand really well this threat and how we can take it and conduct it and use it as part of the threat hunting for all of our customers. So this one, for example, is basically Veil Drive. This is a campaign that we published about, like, I believe 10 days ago or something like it. In this incident, basically the attacker used the initial access that I described, but he also used OneDrive-based command and control. He also abused many different services. All of them are Microsoft services, including OneDrive, SharePoint, Quick Assist, Azure VM, Microsoft Teams, creation of a app registration in Entra ID to allow the communication with OneDrive. So all of it together in the in-depth research that we conducted helped us to take all of these deliverables and make sure that we conduct a threat-focused, threat-based threat hunting for all of our customers. And I really, really believe that this kind of cycle, like taking the outcome of each of the services that we provide, but it can be related to any security team out there, take the outcome of each of the services and each of the projects or each of the cases that you work on and try to use it as part of the other services. It's super, super important and can make security teams out there better, both in proactive aspect, making sure that they detect things that probably weren't detected without it, and also making sure that they are familiar with the threats that are going on in the wild and ready for any case of investigation that they will need to face later on.
all of you have such an extensive experience from all over security roles, over the security stack, different teams, different kind of area of expertise. I was interested in what do you have to suggest the SOC teams here in the audience? What do you think is the key motivations or I know key factors that threat actors will be leveraging I know in 2025 or in the future in general? What should they be most concerned about?
I really believe that it's a big thing to say, right? But I really believe that from my familiarity with SOC teams, it's super important that any SOC analyst out there will try to educate himself in some way about at least the common attacks in the cloud. I believe this is an area that, even though we are in 2024, right, most of the analysts still need to be more familiar with. It's a totally different thing. It's a totally different game. Let's call it this way. You need to understand a lot about different services. And even if it doesn't mean that you need to be like a cloud security expert to understand everything, the familiarity with the different SaaS services and the cloud services that are available with at least the big vendors out there, Azure, AWS, GCP, understand the main attacks and the main threats that are related to them. I believe it's super important. And after understanding this, you can focus on specific areas in which you want to get better in and better understand the specific characteristics and about better understand the log sources themselves and everything related to it. But first, understand how the cloud services work and be familiar with at least the most common ones.
So I definitely agree with both Amitai and Alon. And I think maybe the connection between the two will be my perspective. So I think definitely we're still going to see ransomware attack and specifically data attack, but probably with shift to the cloud. So as Alon mentioned, we should get familiar with the data services in the cloud, make sure that we have the relevant setup in place, the relevant tools. It's a different set of logs of evidence that you should make sure to collect and to ingest and to monitor.
Actually, I want to add one more thing, which I didn't think about because it was a surprise question, of course. That is like a genuine tip to SOC analysts specifically, because like I haven't done the incident response for quite a while, but this is something that always came into mind, that when you're triaging alerts and looking at stuff happening in your network, try to think whether it would require a human interaction on the other side of the alert. Because if you think that there is an active attacker operating on the keyboard on the other side, then you're in a totally different game, and then you need to understand it, you need to escalate it further. And I think that's a very important point that a lot of SOC teams miss, because they just see an alert for CobbleStrike, for example. But if you get to the point that CobbleStrike is deployed on an internal server, that means that someone is actively moving in your network, and then you're in a completely different scenario. And I think it's very important for SOC teams to understand that, knowing how to respond properly to those kinds of situations.
Thank you so much to our incredible panelists for sharing such valuable insights. We've covered a lot. I hope you're all walking away with new strategies and perspectives to take back to your teams.